The cold November rain painted the streets of New York with shimmering reflections of neon lights. People hurried along the sidewalks, shielding themselves under umbrellas, their coats pulled tight against the wind. Among them, a woman moved with quiet determination, her face partially hidden beneath the hood of her sweatshirt. Sandra Bullock had just arrived in the city after a long flight. She was exhausted but needed a place to stay before an important event the next morning. A hotel had been booked in advance, a supposedly simple check-in process awaited her. Yet, deep down, she knew nothing in her life was ever truly simple. She stepped through the grand entrance of the Orion Majestic, one of the city's most renowned luxury hotels. The scent of vanilla and fresh flowers filled the air, blending with the soft melodies of a live piano performance in the background. Polished marble floors reflected the dazzling chandeliers overhead. Everything about the place whispered exclusivity. Sandra walked towards the reception desk, where a poised young woman with sleek blonde hair stood behind the counter. Her golden name tag read Caroline. The receptionist scanned the approaching guest with a quick, critical gaze. Her smile was professional but lacked warmth. "Good evening," Caroline said, her voice smooth yet slightly detached. "How may I assist you?" Sandra, still keeping her tone friendly, responded, "I have a reservation under the name Sandra Annette." Caroline hesitated, fingers gliding across the keyboard as she checked the system. A small frown formed on her face before she looked up again. "I'm sorry, but I don't see a VIP reservation under that name." Sandra had been through this before. She sighed inwardly, already anticipating where this was going. "I have a confirmation email. Would you like to see it?" She pulled out her phone, navigating quickly to her inbox before showing the screen to Caroline. The receptionist barely glanced at it, her expression unchanging. Instead of acknowledging the confirmation, she let out a short, dismissive sigh. "I'm afraid there might have been a mistake. This hotel caters to a very exclusive clientele." Sandra blinked. She recognized the tone. It was polite on the surface but laced with subtle condescension. She forced a small smile. "I understand that. But my reservation was made in advance, and I have the confirmation right here." Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, our system isn't showing it, ma'am. Perhaps you should consider a more suitable accommodation. There are a few budget-friendly hotels nearby." The suggestion was clear. The implication even clearer. Sandra's grip tightened around her phone. She had spent years in the industry, accustomed to the public recognizing her at a glance. But there were times, like now, when she was just another face to those who assumed too quickly. A few murmurs spread through the lobby as nearby guests began to notice the interaction. A man sitting at the hotel bar discreetly raised his phone, pretending to scroll but clearly snapping a photo. Sandra inhaled deeply. She had no interest in making a scene, but this was becoming ridiculous. "Would you mind double-checking your system?" Caroline's expression barely shifted. She turned back to the computer, fingers gliding over the keyboard without much effort. Sandra, watching closely, caught the faint reflection of the screen in a decorative mirror behind the desk. The home screen was still visible. She wasn't even searching. Sandra's patience was wearing thin. "Is your manager available?" she asked, her voice now firm. Caroline's smirk was barely noticeable, but it was there. "He's quite busy at the moment. But if you'd like, I can verify once more." Before she could finish, the hotel doors swung open, and a gust of cold air swept through the lobby. The murmurs around them died instantly. A tall figure stepped inside, raindrops clinging to his dark suit, his hair slightly damp. The moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted. His presence commanded attention, even from those who hadn't yet realized who he was. Keanu Reeves walked in with a measured pace, his eyes scanning the room briefly before landing on Sandra. Recognition flickered between them in an instant. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Did I take too long?" he asked. Sandra, who had been biting back frustration, suddenly let out a quiet chuckle. "Oh, you know how much I love waiting games." Caroline's face drained of color. Keanu's gaze shifted, locking onto the receptionist. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was calm, yet it carried weight. The entire lobby seemed to be holding its breath. Caroline swallowed hard, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. The power dynamic in the room had shifted in an instant. The tension in the lobby was suffocating. Caroline, who had exuded confidence moments ago, now seemed visibly uneasy. The realization of who she had just dismissed settled in, and it was clear she was scrambling to recover. "Mr. Reeves," she began, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "There seems to have been a small system error. I was just about to resolve it." Sandra, still standing beside him, arched an eyebrow. "A system error?" Her voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the edge beneath it. Keanu glanced at Sandra, then back at Caroline. "Funny how these errors always happen to the wrong people," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of quiet authority. The lobby remained silent, everyone too enthralled by the unfolding drama to even pretend they weren't listening. The couple by the fireplace exchanged glances, and the man at the bar, who had secretly taken a photo earlier, held his phone at the ready, as if debating whether to record. Caroline hesitated. She knew she was cornered. For the first time, she turned back to her screen and actually started typing. This time, the reflection in the mirror behind her showed the reservation system for real. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and within seconds, her eyes widened ever so slightly. There it was. The reservation. Her throat tightened. "As I thought," Keanu said, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "It was never missing." Caroline swallowed. It must have been a glitch in the system. She let out a nervous laugh, but the sound was weak, hollow. No one believed her. Sandra took the printed room key that was hastily placed on the desk and examined it. "Amazing," she said, her tone dry. "The system fixes itself so quickly when the right people ask." The hotel manager, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a crisp navy suit, appeared from the back office. His eyes flicked between Caroline, Sandra, and Keanu, immediately sensing the situation had gone terribly wrong. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock," he greeted, his voice carefully controlled. "Please allow me to personally apologize for this inconvenience." Sandra gave a small, polite nod, but Keanu wasn't done. He turned his full attention to Caroline, who was now gripping the desk so hard her knuckles had gone white. "I just have one question," he said. His voice was still calm, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Caroline shift uncomfortably. She forced a smile. "Yes, sir? Would this system error have happened if I hadn't walked in?" The question hit like a lightning strike. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Caroline parted her lips, searching for an answer, any answer, but nothing came out. Because everyone in the room knew the truth. If Keanu hadn't arrived, Sandra would have been turned away, dismissed as someone who didn't belong. Caroline's silence was her answer. The manager sighed heavily, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. He turned to Caroline. "We'll talk in my office. Now." Caroline's face turned a shade paler, but she nodded stiffly as Sandra, meanwhile, exchanged a glance with Keanu. There was no need for further words. The damage was done, and nothing Caroline said or did now could erase it. Keanu turned to Sandra with a slight smile. "Shall we?" Sandra nodded, slipping the keycard into her pocket. They made their way toward the elevators, leaving behind a room full of wide-eyed spectators. As they stepped inside, the doors sliding shut behind them, Sandra leaned against the wall and exhaled. "Well," she muttered, looking at Keanu. "That was something." Keanu chuckled softly. "You handled it well." She smirked. "You, on the other hand, had her shaking in her heels." He shrugged. "Some people need a reminder that respect isn't reserved for the people they recognize." Sandra sighed, staring at the elevator panel. "You know, what really bothers me isn't that she treated me that way. It's knowing that this happens to people all the time. People who don't have someone like you to show up and turn things around." Keanu was silent for a moment, watching her. Then he said, "I think she just learned that lesson the hard way." The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to a lavish suite floor. Without another word, they stepped out, leaving the storm they had stirred far behind them. The next morning, the atmosphere in the Orion Majestic had noticeably shifted. The hotel staff moved with a newfound sense of caution, whispering amongst themselves, glancing nervously whenever Keanu or Sandra passed by. The air was thick with the weight of the previous night's events. Sandra sipped her coffee in the hotel's dining lounge, the soft hum of conversations filling the space around her. Keanu sat across from her, stirring his tea absently, though his gaze occasionally flicked toward the reception desk in the distance. "So," he said, setting his spoon down. "Think she learned her lesson?" Sandra smirked, following his line of sight. Caroline was at the front desk, standing rigidly beside the hotel manager, who was speaking to her in a hushed but firm tone. Her expression was strained, her usual air of superiority completely gone. "Oh, she learned something," Sandra mused. "Whether or not she changes because of it, that's another story." Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. "Some people need more than one lesson." Just then, the hotel manager turned and spotted them. He straightened his posture and quickly made his way over, clearing his throat before offering a nervous smile. "Ms. Bullock, Mr. Reeves," he greeted, his tone filled with forced politeness. "I want to personally apologize again for the unfortunate experience last night. I can assure you this is not the standard of hospitality we uphold at Orion Majestic." Sandra set her cup down, tilting her head slightly. "Oh? Because it certainly seemed like a well-practiced routine." The manager's smile faltered. Of course, that's not how we want to be perceived. Which is why we'd like to extend a complimentary stay for the remainder of your trip. Additionally, we'd be honored if you'd allow us to host you for a private, 5-star dining experience tonight, as a token of our deepest regret." Keanu leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "A grand gesture." Sandra sighed, exchanging a glance with him. She knew what he was thinking, knew that neither of them had any interest in accepting an offer that was only being made because of their names. She turned back to the manager and gave him a small, polite smile. "That's very generous, Mr. Williams. But I think we'll have to decline." The manager blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "Oh, well, if there's anything else we can do to make things right, you can make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else," Sandra said, her voice steady but firm. Mr. Williams swallowed. "Absolutely. I can assure you, we're already taking steps to re-evaluate our training protocols." Keanu gave him a knowing look, as if to say, "We'll see about that." The manager, sensing the conversation was over, nodded quickly. "Of course. If you need anything before you check out, please don't hesitate to let me know personally." Sandra and Keanu watched as he hurried back to the reception desk, where Caroline was still standing stiffly. She cast a quick, panicked glance in their direction before averting her eyes. Sandra exhaled, pushing her plate away. "I think I'm ready to go." Keanu nodded. "Let's get out of here." They left the dining lounge, heading toward the elevators. As they passed through the lobby, conversations dipped, guests stealing glances at them. A few staff members discreetly lowered their heads as they walked by. By the time they reached the car waiting for them outside, Sandra let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What?" She leaned against the car door, gazing at the hotel's grand facade. "Just thinking about Caroline. Wondering if she'll ever judge someone like that again." Keanu sighed, resting his arm on the car's roof. "She has a choice. Learn from it or keep living in her bubble." Sandra chuckled. "That was very zen of you." Keanu smirked. "I've been around." They got into the car, the city stretching out before them. As the vehicle pulled away from Orion Majestic, Sandra's phone buzzed with a new message. She glanced at the screen, a video link sent by a friend. She clicked on it, and a familiar scene played out. A guest being dismissed by a receptionist. A familiar voice, dripping with false politeness, saying, "Perhaps a more affordable hotel would suit your needs." Sandra shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. Keanu, watching from the passenger seat, raised an eyebrow. "Something interesting?" Sandra locked her phone and leaned back. "Just proof that sometimes, people really do get what they deserve." And with that, they drove off, leaving the past night's events in the rearview mirror. As the car moved through the busy streets of New York, Sandra watched the lights blur past the window, her thoughts lingering on the events of the past night. She had experienced situations like that before, people making assumptions, treating others differently based on appearances. But this time, something about it stuck with her. Keanu, noticing her silence, nudged her lightly with his elbow. "You're thinking too hard." Sandra smirked, shaking her head. "You ever wonder how many people go through that kind of treatment every day? People without cameras or recognizable faces to back them up?" Keanu leaned back, stretching his long legs. "More than we'll ever know." Sandra sighed. I wish I could do something about it. Keanu glanced at her, something thoughtful passing through his expression. Then, as if deciding something, he pulled out his phone. Maybe we can. Sandra raised an eyebrow. What are you doing? Keanu tapped on his screen a few times, then handed the phone to her. She looked down and saw an article from a popular news site, one already covering last night's incident. The headline read, "Luxury Hotel Receptionist Humiliates Guest Until Keanu Reeves Walks In." Sandra winced. Wow. They didn't hold back. Keanu grinned. It's not just them. Look at the comments. Sandra scrolled through, her eyes widening as she read. I can't believe this still happens in 2025. Hotels should be training staff better. This isn't just about celebrities. I've been treated like this before, and it's humiliating. If Keanu hadn't shown up, would she have even apologized? Doubt it. Sandra let out a low whistle. People are really fired up about this. Keanu nodded. They should be. A thought formed in Sandra's mind, an idea she couldn't ignore. She turned to Keanu, a mischievous glint in her eyes. What if we did something about it? Keanu tilted his head. I'm listening. Sandra smirked. We've both had long careers, right? We've been in enough luxury hotels to know how things work behind the scenes. What if we started a project that highlights how everyday people get treated in these places? Maybe an anonymous review system. Or a platform where people share experiences. Keanu's eyes lit up with interest. Like a watchdog for hospitality? Sandra nodded. Exactly. But it's not just about calling out bad behavior. We highlight the good, too. Hotels that treat everyone with respect, not just VIPs. Keanu rubbed his chin. I like it. Sandra grinned. And I know exactly where we can start. Keanu smirked. Let me guess, Orion Majestic? Sandra leaned back in her seat, a playful smile on her lips. Oh, you know it. Keanu chuckled. This is gonna be fun. The car continued through the city, but now, they weren't just moving forward physically, they had set something in motion. Something that might just make a difference, and Sandra Bullock loved nothing more than a good challenge. Over the following weeks, Sandra and Keanu's idea began to take shape. They enlisted the help of some trusted friends in the industry and reached out to developers to create a platform named Respect Rated. The mission was simple but powerful: offer a space where guests could share their experiences at hotels. From the grandest resorts to the simplest inns, users could leave reviews, rate their treatment, and highlight staff members who went above and beyond, or, conversely, those who fell short of basic respect. The platform also featured stories from people of all backgrounds, illustrating the subtle ways bias and prejudice could creep into customer service. The response was overwhelming. Within days of launching, stories poured in. Some were heartwarming tales of kindness, like a hotel clerk who went out of their way to help a lost traveler. Others mirrored Sandra's experience, stories of being dismissed or judged based on appearances or preconceived notions, and there, prominently displayed on the homepage, was the story of the Orion Majestic incident, detailed anonymously, but recognizable to anyone who had followed the news. Caroline's behavior had become a cautionary tale, reminding everyone that you never truly know who you're speaking to or who might be listening. Sandra couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as the platform gained traction. Change, she knew, didn't happen overnight. But this was a start point. One morning, as Sandra was scrolling through the latest stories on Respect Rated, her phone buzzed with a new email. It was from an unfamiliar address, but the subject line caught her attention: a lesson learned. Opening it, she found a surprisingly sincere message from Caroline. Dear Ms. Bullock, I am writing to you not out of obligation, but because recent events have forced me to confront some harsh truths about myself. What happened at Orion Majestic was more than just a mistake, it was a reflection of my own prejudice and lack of empathy. Seeing the impact of my actions spread across the internet has been both humiliating and enlightening. I've since left my position at the hotel and am working towards a new career where I can rebuild myself and hopefully make amends. I know an apology doesn't change what happened, But I wanted you to know that your actions have inspired me to become a better person. Thank you for holding a mirror up to my behavior and showing me the consequences of my actions. Sincerely, Caroline. Sandra read the email twice, then set her phone down, her emotions a blend of relief and contemplation. When she met up with Keanu later that day for coffee, she shared the email with him. He took a sip, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Looks like your idea is already making waves. Sandra nodded slowly. If it helps even one person change, then it's worth it. Keanu smiled softly. That's the thing about respect, it doesn't cost anything, but it's priceless. Sandra glanced out the cafe window, watching people pass by, each with their own story, their own struggles. I think we're onto something big. Keanu followed her gaze, a sense of optimism warming his usually stoic features. Yeah. And I can't think of anyone better to lead the charge. As they sat there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city, both realized that sometimes, the smallest actions could ignite the biggest changes. And maybe, just maybe, their story would be the spark that encouraged others to demand the respect they deserved, no matter who they were or where they came from.